There is a specific kind of financial frustration that doesn't get talked about enough. It's not the frustration of someone who's never tried. It's the frustration of someone who has tried, who reads the articles, downloads the apps, makes the spreadsheets, follows the advice, and still ends up in roughly the same place, year after year. These are not careless people. These are not financially illiterate people. In many cases, they are the most financially aware people in their social circle. And they are still broke. Not broke because they don't care. Not broke because they don't know better. Broke in spite of trying. And that particular kind of broke is the most dangerous kind, because when the efforts don't work, most people assume the problem is them. It isn't. The problem is that they've been solving the wrong thing. Today we're going to look at what's actually going on. 6 behavioral patterns that keep financially aware, genuinely motivated people stuck. And why none of them are fixed by working harder or earning more. The setup: knowledge isn't the gap here is a strange fact about personal finance. Financial literacy in the United States has never been higher. There is more free, high-quality information about money management, investing, and budgeting available today than at any point in human history. You can learn compound interest from a YouTube video in 8 minutes. You can build a diversified portfolio on your phone in 20. And yet, consumer debt levels are near record highs. The personal savings rate is near record lows. And surveys consistently show that a majority of Americans couldn't cover a $1,000 emergency from their savings account. The information isn't the problem. Something else is. What decades of behavioral economics research has revealed is this: financial outcomes are driven less by what people know and far more by patterns of behavior that operate largely below conscious awareness. These patterns are not random. They follow predictable structures. And they are almost entirely invisible to the people running them. That's what we're going to examine today, not the information gap. The behavior gap. Pattern 1. The precision trap. The first pattern is one of the most counterintuitive. Let's call it the precision trap. Ask most financially struggling people what they need, and a significant number will say, "I need a better budget." So they build one. And it's thorough. It accounts for everything: groceries broken into subcategories, entertainment split by streaming service, a line item for miscellaneous that has a sub-budget within it. They spend a weekend building this thing. And then, within 3 to 6 weeks, it's completely abandoned. This isn't laziness. The research on this is fascinating. A study published in the Journal of Marketing Research found that budgets with highly specific categories actually increase overspending in adjacent categories, because the mental effort of tracking everything creates cognitive fatigue, and fatigue breaks discipline faster than temptation does. The complexity becomes the failure mode. The households with the most stable long-term financial behavior don't typically run 47 category budgets. They run what behavioral economists call envelope logic: broad, simple buckets with clear upper limits. The simplicity is not a sign of unsophistication. It's a feature. It reduces the decision fatigue that precision-obsessed budgeting creates. The takeaway here is uncomfortable. Your budget might be failing not because it's too loose, but because it's too detailed. Complexity feels like rigor, but rigor you abandon is worse than simplicity you maintain. Pattern 2. Mental accounting. The hidden distortion. The second pattern is so deeply embedded in how the human brain processes money that most people never notice it's happening. It's called mental accounting. And it was one of the central discoveries that earned Richard Thaler the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2017. Here's the phenomenon. Rationally, $1 is $1. $10 you found in an old coat pocket is worth exactly the same as $10 in your checking account. But the brain does not treat them the same way. It categorizes money based on where it came from and mentally assigns it different rules. Money you earned from labor feels serious. Money that arrived unexpectedly, a tax refund, a bonus, a birthday check, gets mentally tagged as found money and treated with dramatically less financial discipline. Studies tracking household spending behavior after tax refund season consistently show that the refund money is spent at nearly twice the rate of equivalent earned income, and on very different categories. Discretionary spending, not essentials. Here's why this matters structurally. A tax refund is not found money. It is your own income that was withheld, held by the government, and returned without interest. You earned it. It belongs in the same mental category as your paycheck. But because of how it arrived, the brain treats it like a windfall. The same distortion runs in reverse. Many people have money sitting in a savings account earning 4%, while simultaneously carrying a credit card balance at 22%. Mathematically, the rational move is obvious, but mentally, the savings account feels like future money untouchable, while the credit card is a separate, manageable monthly bill. Mental accounting isn't irrational. It's the brain trying to simplify complexity. But it is systematically expensive. And it continues operating silently until you name it. Pattern 3. The arrival fallacy, the third pattern, may be the most expensive belief in personal finance. It sounds like this: once I make more, I'll get ahead. There's a name for the psychological structure underneath that belief. Harvard psychologist Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar calls it the arrival fallacy, the persistent, quietly held conviction that a future milestone will solve a present problem. In financial terms, it works like this. When income increases, the brain interprets it as a transition point, a moment when the constraint lifts. So it relaxes. Spending expands, not recklessly. Incrementally, a slightly nicer apartment. Eating out 3 times a week instead of 1. A car payment that felt unjustifiable before but feels reasonable at the new income level. This is lifestyle inflation. And the reason it's so hard to catch is that every individual decision within it is defensible. You worked hard for this raise. You deserve the nicer apartment. The car is for the commute. The restaurants are because you're exhausted and you earned it. Each decision, in isolation, is not wrong. Collectively, they consume the raise entirely, and the person is left at the new income level, feeling exactly as financially constrained as they did before, but now with higher fixed costs. The research on this is stark. A Federal Reserve study found that for every dollar increase in household income above a certain threshold, discretionary spending tends to absorb between 60 and 80 cents of it within 12 months. The raise doesn't fix the gap, it just scales the ceiling. The only pattern that reliably breaks this is what financial behaviorists call paying yourself first, not as a motivational slogan, but as a literal architectural change. Automating savings before the money enters the spendable pool. Making the decision once, at the system level, so that no willpower or discipline is required in the day-to-day execution. Because willpower isn't the solution. Systems are. Pattern 4. Present bias, the time problem, the fourth pattern, runs deeper than habits or beliefs. It is a cognitive feature of the human brain, one that made complete sense for most of human history, and makes personal finance almost structurally difficult in a modern economy. It's called present bias, and it describes the brain's systematic tendency to overweight immediate rewards and underweight future ones, even when we consciously know better. In a classic behavioral economics experiment, the majority of participants chose $50 today over $65 in 3 weeks, even when they would easily choose the $65 if both options were in the future. The moment now is on the table, rationality bends toward it. This is not weakness. This is wiring. For most of human history, a resource you had today was far more valuable than a resource you might have later. The brain evolved in an environment where the future was genuinely uncertain. Delay often meant nothing. But the modern financial system is almost entirely built on deferred gratification. Retirement accounts, compound interest, mortgages, insurance, all of these are systems where you give up something real and present in exchange for something larger and future. The problem is that the brain doesn't feel compound interest. It feels the $200 contribution leaving the account this month. The $400,000 it becomes in 30 years is a concept, not a sensation. This is why automation is so powerful, not because it requires less discipline, but because it removes the moment-by-moment decision entirely. When the transfer is automatic, present bias never gets a vote. Pattern 5. Social spending, the invisible budget line. The fifth pattern is one that almost never appears in personal finance content because it requires acknowledging something uncomfortable. A significant portion of our spending isn't driven by what we want, it's driven by what we don't want other people to think about us. Call it social spending. Purchases made not for the thing itself, but for the signal it sends or the awkwardness it avoids. The group dinner where everyone ordered lavishly and you go along with splitting the bill evenly, even though the math doesn't work for you. The wedding gift that exceeded your actual budget because you worried how the amount would read. The car upgrade that happened, quietly, right after a neighbor bought something nicer. These decisions are often not conscious. They rarely show up in budget reviews because they feel like social obligations, not discretionary choices. But they are, financially, the same thing. Money leaving your account for a reason that had nothing to do with your actual preferences. Research by the financial services firm Bankrate found that nearly 40% of respondents reported spending money they hadn't planned to specifically because of social pressure in the preceding month. Peer spending is one of the most reliable and least discussed drivers of financial stress. The mechanism isn't greed or status seeking, though those can play a role. Mostly, it's conflict avoidance and the basic human need to belong. You are not going to solve this by caring less about what people think. That's not how psychology works. What you can do is name it. When a spending decision is made, a brief internal question, am I buying this? Or, am I buying belonging? Creates a gap between impulse and action. That gap is where choice lives. Pattern 6, the financial identity problem. The sixth pattern is the one that ties all the others together. And it's the deepest one. Most people who struggle financially don't have a knowledge problem, or even purely a behavior problem. They have an identity problem. Here's what that means. Behavioral research consistently shows that the most powerful predictor of long-term behavior change isn't motivation or information. It's self-concept, the story a person holds about who they are. If someone at some level carries a belief like I'm just not a money person, or people in my family have never been good with money or even saving, is for people who have something left over. Those beliefs act as invisible governors. They set a ceiling. Every behavior eventually reverts to fit the identity. This is why short-term financial successes often don't stick. A person who doesn't see themselves as someone who saves successfully will, over time, find a way to return to not saving even after a period of discipline. The behavior was adopted. The identity wasn't updated. The research on this, particularly James Clear's work on identity-based habit formation and Shankar Vedantam's studies on subconscious behavior, points to the same conclusion. Sustainable financial change doesn't start with a new budget. It starts with a new answer to the question, what kind of person am I? Small, deliberately chosen behaviors, not because of their financial impact, but because of what they say about who you are, compound into an identity shift over time. Saving $10 a week matters less as a financial act than as a repeated signal to yourself, I am someone who saves. The behavior follows the belief. Always. Conclusion. The actual problem, let's close with what all 6 of these patterns have in common. None of them are fixed by a raise. None of them are solved by more financial information. None of them respond to guilt or discipline or willpower as primary tools. They are behavioral and psychological structures, some built by evolution, some built by culture, some built by the specific financial environment you grew up in. And they operate largely invisibly, which is why financially aware, genuinely motivated people can spend years doing everything right and still not move. The precision trap keeps you building systems too complex to maintain. Mental accounting distorts how you value the same money depending on its origin. The arrival fallacy keeps the solution permanently in the future. Present bias makes the future feel less real than it is. Social spending drains the budget for reasons that never appear in a category. And financial identity sets the ceiling everything else bumps against. None of these are character flaws. All of them are fixable, not through effort alone, but through understanding. because you cannot solve a problem you haven't correctly named. You're not broke because you don't earn enough. You're not broke because you don't care enough. You're operating inside a set of patterns that were never designed for financial health, and the first step out is simply seeing them clearly. Clarity first. Everything else follows. If one of these 6 patterns resonated more than the others, drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious which one hits closest to home, because the distribution is always more interesting than the theory. If you want to go deeper on any of these, I've got full videos on several of them already on this channel. The one on present bias and automation is probably the most practically useful place to start. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of work, no hype, just the actual research behind why money behaves the way it does in real people's real lives. See you in the next one.